The modern superhero problem is that they have all become too similar. We have endless variations on the same character with the same story beats, the same tone, and the same kind of humor. There are so many superheroes out there now that we need new ways to tell their stories if we want them to stay relevant. But instead, we keep recycling the same old origin stories and character beats over and over again. That's why when a different type of superhero comes along, even if it's not perfect, it still feels fresh and exciting. Ironheart is a superhero that should be different than the rest. She is a teenage girl who built her own armor and became a hero despite never having any superpowers. In theory, this could be a really interesting take on the superhero genre, but in practice, it falls flat because of how the character was introduced in Wakanda Forever. Who is Ironheart supposed to be? When we meet Riley in the movie, she's a teenager who is obsessed with technology and tinkering. She spends her time building robots and taking apart old gadgets just for fun. And when she's not doing that, she's hanging out with her friends and trying to look cool. Overall, she seems like a pretty typical teenager, except for one small detail: her mind is basically a quantum computer. Riley is a genius inventor who can build incredible machines simply by looking at them. But because she's so young, no one takes her seriously. They just think she's a weird kid who's obsessed with tech. It is only after she builds a suit of armor that people start to realize she is actually a genius. Now, this isn't exactly a unique character. In fact, it's pretty much the exact same character as Tony Stark, except Tony was an adult when he built his first Iron Man suit, and he had more charisma, intelligence, and likability. What makes Iron Man work is that Tony is such a charming and charismatic guy that you root for him even though he is a total jerk most of the time. With Riley, none of that charm or charisma is present. Instead, she's just a typical teenager who does stereotypical teenager things. She hangs out with her friends, worries about boys, and gets into fights. None of these things make her unique or interesting as a character. And that's a problem because she's supposed to be the new Iron Man. She needs to be more than just a typical teenager. Her rushed introduction in Wakanda Forever. One of the biggest problems with Ironheart is that it took Marvel 8 movies to introduce her. She was first mentioned in Black Panther, then again in Avengers, Infinity War, and Endgame. After that, we didn't hear anything about her until the end of Shang-Chi, when we finally got to see her in person. And even then, she wasn't in the movie for very long. She just showed up at the end to say hello to Tony Stark's parents. So when we finally got to see her in Wakanda Forever, it felt like we were just being trolled. We had been waiting for years to see this character, and all we got was a quick cameo. When a character has been hyped up for so long, it creates high expectations. If you tease a character for 8 straight movies, the audience is going to expect something special. But Ironheart didn't deliver. She's not a very compelling character, and her introduction is so brief that it does not give us any time to get invested in her. We don't learn anything about her personality, her motivations, or her backstory. We just see her hang out with some other characters for a few minutes, and then she disappears again. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. You're probably thinking that it's too early to judge Ironheart because we have not seen enough of her yet. But that's not really true. We've seen enough of her to get a good idea of who she is as a character. And what we've seen so far is not very promising. The only thing that sets her apart from all the other teenage superheroes is her genius-level intellect. But that's not enough to make a character stand out. There needs to be more there. Some kind of unique trait that makes her different from all the other superheroes. Tony vs. Riri. Now, I know I've spent a lot of time talking about Tony Stark, but that's for a reason. He's the character that Ironheart is supposed to be replacing. And if you compare the two characters, it becomes clear why Ironheart hasn't been successful. Tony was a multi-billionaire genius, playboy philanthropist. He was also an alcoholic and a liar. He had a lot of baggage, but that made him a more interesting character. Riley, on the other hand, is just a typical teenager. She's smart, sure, but she's not a genius. She's not an alcoholic or a liar. She's just a normal person who built a suit of armor. And that's not nearly as interesting. The thing that makes Tony so compelling is his flaws. He's selfish, he's irresponsible, and he's a liar, but those flaws also make him human. He's not perfect, but he tries to do the right thing anyway. That's what makes him such a great role model for kids. He shows them that it's okay to make mistakes as long as you learn from them and move on. Riley, on the other hand, has no flaws. She's basically a Mary Sue, and that's not very relatable. Kids want to read about flawed characters who struggle to do the right thing. They don't want to read about perfect characters who always do the right thing. Another problem with Ironheart is that it's obvious that she's being set up to take over for Tony Stark. There's no subtlety. It's just like, hey, Tony's gone, so let's bring in this random teenager who's kind of like him, but not exactly. And that's not how character development works. If you want the audience to accept a new character, you can't just throw them into a movie and expect them to be popular. They need to grow and change over the course of the story. And they need to be different from the characters that came before them, the real villain. So at this point, you might be wondering who the real villain of Ironheart is. Is it the writers who created a boring character? Or is it the audience who expects too much from a new superhero? Well, the answer is neither. The real villain is bad writing. The problem with Ironheart isn't that she's a boring character. It's that she's a product of lazy writing. She's not a victim of circumstance or a casualty of the audience's expectations. She's just bad. How the MCU's speed creates empty characters. The Marvel Cinematic Universe is moving faster than ever. There are so many movies and TV shows coming out each year that it's impossible to keep track. And that speed has led to some questionable creative decisions. In an effort to keep the audience engaged, Marvel has started introducing characters without giving them proper introductions. They just show up in a movie and we're supposed to care about them even though we know nothing about them. Ironheart is the perfect example of this. She's introduced in a post-credit scene, then teased for 8 straight movies, and then finally given a rushed introduction in Wakanda Forever. By the time we finally get to see her, we've been hyped up for so long that we have high expectations. But Ironheart doesn't live up to those expectations. She's not a very compelling character, and her introduction is so brief that it doesn't give us any time to get invested in her. Can her Disney Plus show fix this? Now, I know what some of you are thinking. You're probably thinking that it's too early to judge Ironheart because her Disney show hasn't come out yet. And you'd be right, I haven't seen the show, so I can't comment on how well it lives up to the hype. But I can tell you what I'm hoping for. I hope that the show gives us a better understanding of who Ironheart is as a character. I want to see her struggle with her powers. I want to see her make mistakes and learn from them, and I want to see her grow as a person. If the show can do that, then maybe Ironheart will finally get the respect that she deserves, but don't hold your breath. Marvel has a history of killing off characters that aren't very popular. Remember the Inhumans? They were supposed to be Marvel's next big thing, but their TV show was so bad that Marvel decided to just kill off the entire race. Don't be surprised if Marvel does the same thing to Ironheart. In conclusion, Ironheart is a character that could have been really cool, but the execution just wasn't there. She's not a bad character, but she's not a very good character either. She's just kind of there, and that's the problem with modern superheroes. They're all just kind of there. There's no heart, no soul, no passion. They're just empty vessels that are filled with mindless action and forced humor. That's why I'm so excited about the possibility of a good superhero movie. It might not happen anytime soon, but I'll be waiting. Thank you for watching.